Welcome to A Night for Truth, conversations with Dr. Alice von Hildebrand concerning the work of her husband, Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was one of the greatest Catholic thinkers of the 20th century. And I might add here, I happen to have spent my life as an English professor. I am Tom Howard. Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote many of his works in English, which was not his native language. There are two other authors who share with him an extraordinary command of the English language, which is far, far beyond, I'm afraid, the grasp of most native English speakers. One was the novelist Joseph Conrad, whose native language was Polish or Czech? Polish. Mm-hmm. And Isak Dinesen, the Danish baroness, who wrote short stories. Both of them wrote beautiful English. And I must confess that one of the great pleasures to me when I first came upon the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand was the elegant exactness and precision of his prose. And not only that, but his massive command of English vocabulary. There's not a cliche in the whole thing. You are never reading tired, leftover prose. He doesn't borrow shop-worn, threadbare expressions. He writes, as it were, with a scalpel, you might say. He brings language to the business for which language was made, namely exactitude and the opening up of truth. We are going to address ourselves in this program to his chapter on holy patience. We're talking about transformation in Christ. If some of you have joined us for the first time. And this is a book which explores with remorseless thoroughness what is involved in our move from being possibly very nice, very intelligent, very civilized sorts of people, but unregenerate. And the encounter with the Redeemer, Jesus Christ, is something which, of course, eventually requires an entire transformation of our whole being. The Church tells us that there is nothing less involved in this than our total configuration to Christ. If you yourself have started on this set of lessons, we might say, you will know that you and the rest of us have our work cut out. And Dietrich von Hildebrand, in this book, shines the light, to change the metaphor from the scalpel to, let's say, a very bright light, on point after point after point, which it is necessary to bring to light and to mull over, to ruminate upon, and to see, to explore the senses in which, this attitude, which comes very naturally to me and so on, needs to be redeemed. I can see that it springs from egocentrism. Let me just give you two or three of the little headings in this chapter, Holy Patience. These were added by an editor. These are not Dietrich von Hildebrand's own words, but I think you'll begin to see something of the skill and agility with which he addresses himself to a topic. Then I will stop talking and turn things over to Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, whose knowledge of her husband's work is absolutely massive. But the first section in the chapter, Holy Patience, says, indolence is not the same as Christian patience. That is a slothful, sluggardly attitude or frame of mind. Stoic indifference is not the same as Christian patience, just sort of setting my jaw and saying nothing will bother me. That's not the same as Christian patience. Buddhist placidity, this immense and apparently fathomless calm, almost the phlegmatic. Von Hildebrand says this is not the same as Christian patience. Patience is opposed to petulance and inconstancy. Petulance is a lovely word. It's that frame of mind, that quality in me that is just extremely ready to be irritated. I'm almost looking for chances to have my feathers ruffled. That's petulance. A more serious form of that is truculence, if you like learning new words. And then he goes on, impatience is a form of self-indulgence. Well, as you can see, if you begin reading these chapters here, you find yourself under a very, very remorseless scrutiny, shall we say. Well, Dr. von Hildebrand, tell us about your husband's treatment of this topic of patience.
It's a topic in which I feel that I could speak for hours, because it's a virtue that I've been trying to get, and I haven't achieved it in any sense of the term, because I'm extremely impatient. And so all I need to do is to analyze myself and to observe myself and have some deep insights into what impatience is.
I'm afraid if you asked my wife and children, they would have a few remarks.
And simultaneously the understanding that it is crucial in order to be transformed in Christ. Now let me go briefly over the things that patience is not, because we know we live in a world of confusion. In some way you can say what characterizes the 20th century is universal confusion. We confuse, to quote Isaiah, dark and light, and good and evil, and beauty and ugliness. And so what we have to do first is to try to show that there are certain qualities that people might mistake for holy obedience, holy patience, which have actually nothing to do with it. Some people have a very phlegmatic temperament, because...
You gotta explain the word phlegmatic.
Phlegmatic is, well, suppose that I say very slow-moving, and they don't get excited, sluggish. And they're sluggish, and they don't get easily upset, and somehow because things do not quite register in them, or it registers at a very slow pace. For example, it is interesting that in Belgium you have the Flemish part of the country and you have the southern part of the country, and one is Flemish and therefore Germanic, and the other one is Latin and therefore French. And the difference of temperament between the two is absolutely amusing, because Flemish people are usually slow-moving and so on, and the others are very quick and very fast and very nervous and so on and so on.
Volatile.
And so it's a question of temperament. And I grant you that to be with phlegmatic people, sluggish people, slow-moving people, at times can be relaxing. Particularly if you happen to be next to someone who is always on the qui-vive and always on the alert and always nervous and always rushing and so on and so on. On the other hand, sometimes they can get on your nerves in a terrible way, because you feel like shaking them and saying, don't you understand that there's something going on, you've got to do something. And they don't move and say, yes. They can't get them moving. Holy patience is not that.
I had a friend, a colleague of mine, when I was teaching in a prep school in New York, who I think would be the archetype of the phlegmatic person. He was elegantly and exquisitely bored by everything, and he used to tell me, I wouldn't go around the corner to see the world blow up. I think he needed to be.
Well, he was too lazy to move, that's all there's to it, you see. Of course, another confusion which is possible is the Stoic. And I recall when I was a student many years ago, my husband gave an admirable course. Part of it was Stoic ethics. And the idea that the Stoic feels that he's so powerful and so great that nothing can upset him. That is a key issue. I'm above whatever can happen, and so on. And so
this comes from ancient Greece, by the way.
And then, of course, yes. Well, and then, of course, it was duplicated in Rome, and some of the very most outstanding Stoics were Romans. And one of them wrote, if the whole world were to perish, the ruins would see me unmoved watching the spectacle. You see, in other words, I'm much too great a person to be upset by anything. Nothing can hurt me, nothing can affect me, and so on and so on, which is, as my husband had shown very strikingly in his course, the most refined form of pride. I'm above it. You know, in other words, I mean, suppose that you spit in my face, I'm just going to say, well, the spitting comes from too low, it cannot possibly affect me, you see what I mean? Which is, of course, the very opposite of patience, even though the ideal is self-control. That you always yourself under perfect command and nothing happens, you know, unless you actually dominate it and will it. And then you have something which is very different and is often confused with Stoicism, which is basically the philosophy of Buddhism. You know, the very core of Buddhism is to try to escape from suffering. And it accounts for the fact that innumerable young people, and I'm speaking about very many of my students in Hunter, were attracted by Buddhism because suffering is the one great unanswered question in human life. I mean, why should we suffer? Why is there so much suffering? And all of a sudden you meet the acquaintance of the Buddha who says to you, I will teach you how to escape from suffering. You know, it's simply because you look at the world from a wrong perspective. If you had a new mentality, if your intellectual apparatus will work differently, you will find out that actually we live in a world which is unreal and unsubstantial.
Illusion.
You know, it's like, let us say, the shadow of the moon on a lake. You know, it's like a shadow, and therefore, the very moment that you realize that these things are not to be taken seriously, this is not the ultimate reality, there's something back of it, there's something which is higher than that, and you can escape from it, then obviously, I mean, suppose, for example, that I see you tortured by someone, there's nothing that I can do to help you, and suddenly I say to myself, well, it's a sort of nightmare, but I mean, there's nothing to worry about, because you know that it's not real. Now, this is not holy patience.
Now, I would suspect that by this time, with the three examples you've given so far, that of indolence and Buddhism and what was the other one?
Stoicism and Buddhism.
Stoicism and Buddhism. That the question is beginning to form itself in a lot of minds that are listening to, well, then, if it's not those things, what is Christian patience, and how does it differ, and what is the quality of Christian patience if it's not this ineffable calm of the Buddhists, and if it's not the totally self-controlled calm of the Stoic, and it's not the natural lack of agitated chromosomes in someone who's indolent? What is it? You
know, Tom, you're actually touching the crucial point. Transformation in Christ, from the first line to the last, is trying to show the difference between attitudes that in many cases are naturally good, but something that we can achieve by training, by education, by our own will. In the case of holy patience, it is once again the collaboration between myself and God's grace. It implies that every single moment I realize, and this is something that I'm going to underline because I think it's a key to the whole chapter, we are creatures. We are not God. He is a creator, and we are the creatures. In other words, we are dependent. In other words, we are weak. In other words, we are sinful. In other words, we are constantly in need of help. What was original sin? You know, the amazing thing, the devil dare say to Eve, if you eat of the fruit of this tree, you shall be like God. You'll be like God. And the foolish one is tempted by it. You know, she wanted to become God without God, without His help. And therefore, committed a sin, and unfortunately, her wimp of a husband immediately gave in and ate the forbidden fruit, and of course we know the consequences. So now we are constantly, and this is of fallen nature, in a certain state of revolt. I would like to dominate. I would like my will to be carried through. I would like to achieve this, and I would like to achieve it now. It has to be this very moment.
It's almost as though the impatient person, first being Eve and Adam, the impatient person is forever saying, "Be it done unto me according to my will."
Absolutely.
I want it now.
And very much as, when you read the story of the creation, which is always so overwhelming when you meditate on it, God says, "Be," and the thing became. Now, the impatient man would like to play God and say, "Be, this has to be done now because I will it," and all of a sudden come all the obstacles of our earthly life. So you can see people who live in a constant state of tension, which can sometimes degenerate into rage because they want to achieve something and there's an obstacle. Let me give you a couple of examples. These are things that you know and something that I know. I have seen people banging the phone like mad because the connection is interrupted. Yeah. No, the phone is not responsible for it. It is just too bad. And they bang it, and sometimes they go into tantrums, and they scream, and they shout. A very dear friend of mine in Italy is a very, very, he's a very efficient person, and he was trying to call Rome. Now, Italian phones can drive anybody mad. But Italians know that it is so, and they sort of that, they will say to me, "Well, obviously today there is no gas, or obviously today, now you have to own electricity, of course, there is uno sciopero, which means to see a strike of the trains." And they sort of take it, they say, "Questa la vita," this is life. Where you're an American businessman, and then suddenly you'd like to do so, and suddenly telephone boom. And you just say to yourself, "No, this is something that I can't take. I can't live in a country where people are so inefficient, when nothing works." You see?
In a sense, it's to put the most alarming light on it, but I'm afraid it does have a grain of truth in it. Impatience would be the characteristic frame of mind of someone who wants to be omnipotent.
Absolutely. You cannot put it any better. I want to be God. I want things to be done when I want them, because I want them, and as soon as I want them. Otherwise I revolt and I feel somehow that I'm being cheated. Now, you see what is interesting. I know the temptation of impatience. For example, I live in an apartment house, and I'm on the top floor, and I have a doctor's appointment, or I have to go to Hunter or something of the sort, and someone is holding the elevator way down, and you hear that people are chatting, and so on and so on. And you start banging on the door to remind them, after all, they have to share the elevator. And you get so irritated, you see, because you sort of feel, well, this should not be. Now, lots of things that should not be. And of course, the whole Christian thing is to say to oneself and to repeat to oneself constantly, I am a creature. I am dependent. My will is not to be done. Of course, it is reasonable to try to achieve a goal or to do certain things that are legitimate. But suppose that there is an obstacle. These are things that God permits. I was under spiritual direction for many years. And even though I definitely was a very, very bad student, there are certain rules that I learned. For example, that every situation that irritates me, either I can fall into the sin of impatience and sometimes be very unkind or unfriendly or irritated towards other people, or I can try to use it and make an act of humility and to say to God, this is something that you have permitted. Give me the grace of accepting this difficulty, and I'm going to trust that in some way you're going to make up for it.
I'll give you a lovely little anecdote that fits exactly what you're saying. My oldest friend is a physician. He's an internist and I don't know how doctors work things, but X number of nights per week he's on call. I mean, the phone can ring by his bed. And this would get him nettled, naturally. You know, here's this blasted phone ringing at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, and so on. But he's a Christian, and so he decided, wait just a minute, you know, I'm going the wrong direction on this. So he imposed on himself the little discipline of when the phone would ring at 3 o'clock in the morning, before he would answer, he would just say, "Thank you, Jesus," and then he'd pick it up. He just used
it's a beautiful thing, because it simply he realizes that without prayer he was going to get irritated and possibly very unfriendly. And on the other hand, he managed to use a difficulty as a way of coming closer to Christ.
Yes.
But I mean, this implies, it's relating very much to what we discussed yesterday, namely recollection. That the connection between what I'm doing, and it can be something practical, it can be cooking, it can be doing the dishes, it can be whatever you have to do, and the center in your soul, the very center of my soul, the connection is never cut off. Just as you can have a telephone connection which is cut off and then you cannot communicate. And what is so amazing about the people that are recollected is that even in difficult and trying situations, they keep their peace as a peace and not calm. To my mind, one of the striking differences between Buddhism and the virtue of holy patience is a difference between calm and peace.
Now that's a distinction which I will bet very few of us have thought of. So sharpen that for us.
But I do believe it is absolutely, because it's in one case you are not ruffled, you manage to control yourself, and the other case it implies this lived relationship with Christ. I mean, suppose that in moments of difficulties, and I say, Christ loves me, He's my Savior, and He's permitting that I'm facing this difficulty, then obviously, the total climate is going to be radically changed. Also we are, I'm sorry to say, we're very silly beings. And God must have it silly.
Us? I thought we were very dignified.
We are both. We are both because we are God's children. The way that we behave, sometimes we behave very much like badly brought up children. I set my mind upon doing something. And somehow there's an obstacle, so I cannot do it. Suppose, for example, that you want to visit a friend, and all of a sudden there is a sort of violent tempest and you cannot do it. And you start fuming and raging because you wanted to do it, and an obstacle has prevented you from doing it. But you could just as well do it tomorrow. Instead of just saying, well, very well, I cannot do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. No, I decided to do it, and therefore I want to do it, and so on and so on.
It's that sort of omnipotence syndrome.
You have it. It is, I'm going to call it metaphysical arrogance.
Yeah.
Then I totally forget I'm a weak, imperfect creature. And we have to work on this. We have to keep begging God. One of the difficulties of Christian life, as opposed to Buddhism, let us say, as opposed to Stoicism, is you cannot do it alone. I cannot do it simply because I say, no, I want to do it, but you have to keep begging God. And I believe that God permits us to repeat the same mistake again and again and again and again, for example, in patience, until we learn humility. And then all of a sudden He gives it to us.
And the humility that will ask for help. It's interesting how a topic like this, which would seem to concern itself with rather small things in life, but leads us directly into the doctrine of the Trinity. The third person of the Holy Trinity is called the Paraclete, the one called alongside to help, the one to whom I can turn for assistance in whatever the immediate ordeal can be, and it can be a very small ordeal. I myself reach the end of my patience very quickly when some driver on the interstate has decided to drive in the left-hand lane at 40 miles an hour. Well, I wish there were some sort of bomb that had been invented that I could just lob onto his car. What is he doing in the left lane?
But that's not very gentle.
At 40 miles an hour. Well, I know. There's scarcely sanctity which is governing my attitudes at this point. And very often, I'll find myself saying, embarrassingly elementary things like St. Peter's cry when he was sinking into the water, "Lord, save me or I perish." Save me from this attitude here. We have to wind ourselves up here, alas, déjà.
Well, I'm getting impatient because I thought we still had 5 minutes.
Yes, well, we don't. But we are speaking of your husband's scrutiny of this topic of patience, and I rather suspect that our next conversation will begin right about here, where we are leaving off. It's a nice little clever invitation to say, tune in again next time, same station. Thank you for joining us for yet one more conversation in the series, A Night for Truth, the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand with our special guest, Dr. Alice von Hildebrand. Thank you.